And welcome everybody to Loyalty Leader Insights. We took a break last week and we're back. We've got some fantastic guests for you this week. I'm joined by Stuart Dinnis, the Executive Director of Loyalty Data Company. And for those in the industry, you probably remember Stuart from being the head of loyalty at Virgin America. Rest in peace. And also previous time in commercial director roles in Virgin Australia as well. So, Stuart, we're definitely going to tap into that, particularly that commercial aspect of the experience that you have. So steel yourself for some questions there. And Tommy Langhauser, who's the Senior Manager of Loyalty and Co-Brand at Frontier. Tommy, welcome.
Morning.
I think it's a bit more of a reasonable time for myself and Tommy. Stuart, I think it's the middle of the night there in Brisbane, Australia. So thank you very much for joining us. Easy question to the two of you to start with. The topic of this week's webcast is, can airlines have too many elite members? Now, it's a bit of a loaded question because what does that mean? So let's start kind of nice and simple. I'll throw it to each of you and maybe a quick introduction by yourselves and just tell us, how do you view, what's your kind of top, very, very top philosophical view of the elite program? And just so that we're very clear, when we mean by elite program, we mean frequent flyer programs. You have points and miles that you can earn and redeem for free flights. And then you have your elite or status tiers where frequent flyers have special benefits, whether it be lounge access or priority boarding, special phone numbers, whatever it might be. So what does elite status or elite programs mean to you? Kind of how do you view them? And do they differ from the points and miles programs themselves? Stuart, seeing as you're in the middle of the night, let's start with you before you fall asleep.
Yeah, totally. Elite programs were invented originally to separate the people that travel a lot and know how to get through an airline from those that don't. So it meant that if I was an elite member, I don't have to line up through all the security processing with, the family with 3 kids that are traveling that once a year. So elite membership was really done just to separate the two and make it easier for people that travel regularly to get more quickly through the airport or more quickly through the, airline travel process steps and get from one end to the other without a lot of, being caught up behind other people in the process that aren't experienced in the process or don't travel very regularly. It kind of then flourished into a bit of a gamification. Loyalty programs realised that if we add a little bit of a second currency, a status currency in effect to it, a non-value currency, we can turn people into silver, gold and platinum and that plays to people's egos. And, everyone likes a bit of ego grooming. And so, I guess by playing to that, people then started to talk about their recognition levels and chase higher and higher levels of status, which got them greater benefits and whatever else. So, so status is an interesting aspect from, it's really just a second currency that people put out there beyond the normal points currencies. But largely the processes are about, recognition and benefits of people that fly regularly and help them speed up their process through travel or allow them to separate themselves from people that don't travel regularly. So interesting one.
So at its most basic premise, Stuart, if I take your point, is that status, elite status allows your most frequent customers to remove friction points from the travel experience.
Totally.
Okay, cool. And I mean, let's put kind of as you sort of touched on that there's an aspirational angle there, but I want to kind of circle back to that because I think if I kind of understood your point correctly, that sort of came secondary to the primary purpose of elite programs from an airline's perspective. Did I interpret that right?
Yeah, totally. From an airline perspective, it was about separating people that travel regularly to get rid of the friction areas and let them move through the process quicker without having to get caught up amongst, to coin a term, the great unwashed of the rest of us that don't travel regularly.
Great, Stuart. Thank you so much. Tommy, your quick take, elite status.
So, I mean, Stuart makes a lot of good points, but I think for Frontier's point of view, it's a lot more of the aspirational, but also passing savings on to customers. So, we're unique in that space. We're a ULCC that, caters to the visiting friends and relatives traffic, to the self-funded business traveler. And, this is a way for us to reward them for coming back to us and constantly coming to us, considering we are fairly small compared to the major players here in the States. So, we rebuilt and revamped our program to capture those infrequent as well as the frequent guys and get them to a higher level and the easiest way possible.
And it's interesting. I mean, Tommy, you make a good point about, Frontier's kind of space in the market, and we can talk kind of high level. Stuart, you going first with intro is perfect, because I think if we look at any sort of legacy carrier across the globe, we could probably apply that description. Any legacy program, whether you're talking, American Airlines to British Airways to Qantas to Cathay Pacific to Lufthansa, Singapore Airlines. Pick a legacy global airline, and no one's going to disagree with that assessment. When we talk about an ultra low cost carrier or a more, I don't want to even just myopically focus on that, but a more leisure focused carrier. And I think to myself, Stuart, I'm going to ask you to put your hat back at the time you were at Virgin America, which I think in the Virgin Australia bankruptcy discussions was being or administration discussions was being described as a mid-market airline. Was that the terminology being bandied around Australia right now? The way they were describing Virgin America, is that right?
Yeah, or even Virgin Blue, as it was morphing into Virgin Australia, they described it as it's more like a hybrid between the two models. Tommy makes a very good point. Status has morphed into a different tool that airlines need to think about how they use it, depending on their market position. And Tommy and Frontier use it well. There's not a lot of great innovation in status that's going on in the world, and there hasn't been in the last 30 years. Status match programs and status challenge programs haven't changed, and they're pretty antiquated. The way status benefits are dished out hasn't changed. The core benefits around, I fly this much, I get to this level, and you pretty much get a lounge pass once you get to gold, and then you get super benefits beyond that. But realistically, it's about being able to pick your seat and get through the airline quickly through priority queues, get on board the aircraft, or sit in the lounge. And that's realistically about it. The innovation beyond that isn't that flash.
Mm-hmm. So, Tommy, I mean, you've been doing a lot of work when it comes to the elite program, recently. And I don't mean just this year, but in recent history, you've been spending a lot of your daytime waking hours on this. As a carrier that carries a lot more leisure traffic than a typical legacy, and in the US market, United, American, Delta, even Air Canada, if we go over the border, you operate in a very much a different space. How do you, when you're thinking about elite status or elite programs, elite benefits at Frontier, no doubt you have to have the conversation all the time with a lot of people about, hey, well, this is why it's different for us compared to the legacy airlines. How do you approach that?
So we take a look at our customers, and we accept the fact that we don't sell the dream of a long haul business class ticket across the ocean. We don't have the lounges. So what do we have to offer? We're an ultra low cost carrier. We offer the lowest fares possible, and then everything that people hate, which are all the extra fees, the bags and everything. So we wanted to build our program to alleviate some of those pain points that people, have with the ULCC and reward it to our best customers. So we did that in conjunction with also our co-brand by, uniquely putting a 1-for-1 qualifying for every dollar you spend with our co-brand to really make it where it does cater also to that infrequent traveler. So we do have a couple, we have people that can go ahead and fly 2 times, but then spend the remaining amount on the co-brand, and they have elite for, the next year.
As you're speaking to Tommy, I mean, what I'm thinking about here, and again, I know I kind of framed it as comparing legacy carriers to hybrid, Stuart, or low-cost carriers, more leisure-focused traffic. when we think about elite programs, and again, pick any airline around the world. I don't want to just focus in the US market here because I think this is applicable to all the global legacies. When we think about the elite member spectrum, we have right at the top end. I like to think of this as the right hand side. Maybe that's because I'm right handed. I'm not sure. We have our high spending managed corporate travelers. Very famously, we had that leak, whether it was deliberate or not, out of United, that says out of San Francisco, Apple spends, what is it, $150 million a year and buys 50 business class seats every day to Shanghai. They've just announced they're restarting their San Francisco to Shanghai route. Obviously, Apple wants to go talk to their suppliers. That's the narrative. That type of stereotypical customer represents that high value managed corporate traveler that airlines want to fall over themselves with. Now, elite status isn't the only tool in the toolbox that they use to win over managed corporate travelers. There's invite-only programs, whether it's something like local services, whether it's something like private lounges, that don't even have the name of the lounge on the door. When we think about that type of travel, it's very easy if you're an airline exec to think, hey, you know what? I've got these really super high value customers here. I want to make sure I'm doing everything I can to remove friction points from their travel experience. I want them to feel a little bit special, to your point earlier, Stuart. I want them to feel a little exclusive. And more importantly, as much as I can, I want to try to retain them. I want to introduce switching costs, so that if they start thinking about having a wandering eye and looking at my competitor, they start thinking about all those benefits and perks and friction removal, bonuses that they're going to lose. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we have leisure travelers. We have maybe, I don't mean once and you're never going to see them again as a customer. I mean, maybe you're once a year traveler. They go to grandma's for Thanksgiving every year, or, in Australia, Stuart, they take their holiday to Bali or to Queensland or New Zealand. Not much holidays going on right now with border closures. But that type of traveler, they actually might be a very, very loyal to your airline when you think about share of wallet. Stuart, let's take, Virgin Australia. Maybe they take one family trip a year. They only ever fly Virgin Australia. Their intention is they're never interested in flying Qantas or Air New Zealand or somebody else. But they don't spend a lot of money, but they are particularly loyal. And then you've got everybody else in the middle there, and that's leisure travelers traveling a couple of times a year, people in long distance relationships, people traveling to look after a sick relative, and I would say, self-funded mid-tier travelers. I mean, that's a huge swathe of segments you need to try to build a program for. Tommy, being a more leisure-focused airline, my first question is, does that make it actually easier for you?
So I think it does. We're able to cater to a larger population, and we have a lot more of a customer base for that reason. If we look at, what we do today and the people that come through our airline and our best customers, they're in those groups. They are the people that go into, grandma's for Thanksgiving or Christmas and coming back. And then, they might take a summer trip. But otherwise, a lot of them fly, more infrequent. So we need to definitely cater to those people with the with the large corporate accounts. They're going to be the ones that are hurting here coming up.
Stu, when you think about a more traditional airline and frequent flyer program that does cater to, that does have all of those market segments along that spectrum that I just mentioned, who do airlines want to target? Who are they targeting, and who should they target when it comes to their elite programs?
I think each airline has a different market segment that they're targeting. So to Tommy's point, I think they've got to be very focused on who they look after. At both Virgin Australia and particularly at Virgin America, we did some work at Virgin America where we took 5 years worth of data from flying patterns and ran it through some big data analytics and looked at repeat buying patterns and built some what's called Sankey diagrams And so it's basically showing someone who's flown once that then goes on to fly a second time, a third time, and a fourth time. We actually found there was about a 22% repeat purchase level from one flight to two flights in that airline. So when you talk about corporate travel, that airline didn't have a huge amount of corporate travel relationships. It was a small regional operator. We used a lot of status to, more freely attract people to come and try the product. And once they'd try the product, they'd choose it. But we knew we were a secondary airline, and therefore, they might have had United 1K as their primary card in their back pocket. But every time they had the choice to fly on Virgin America, they chose it due to the product and experience around the brand over United. And so it was more cherry-picking routes and cherry-picking opportunities. The challenge with that was that the individuals we needed to attract were ones that had the choice of choosing what airline they flew on, not locked into a corporate contract necessarily where they were restricted by someone higher up in their organisation who'd signed a deal for them to fly with that airline. So, you work in very different market segments, and so not necessarily is a corporate traveller the best value to you. So you kind of got to get away from some of those definitions and look more at your market segment and the people you're attracting and why you're attracting them.
So in that context, Stuart, and just diving a little deeper into that example there, because you couldn't compete head to head and win over those managed corporate contracts, you couldn't offer somebody who was on a United managed contract you couldn't offer them what United could offer them. I mean, it's just you simply couldn't. So the fact that you had identified that the people you need to go to were the people who were unmanaged travelers, does that put more emphasis or importance on the mid tiers of a program? Does that mean you were sort of, I know you use the example, someone might have been United 1K, but does that really mean you were maybe looking more at people who might have had mid-tier status on a big carrier?
Well, Virgin America, we didn't have a platinum tier. We only had silver and gold. You don't, even at Virgin Blue at Velocity back in the day, back in I'm talking 2007, 2008, it wasn't until 2011 we launched platinum. So we used only silver and gold. So you don't need a big tier structure. You don't need 5 tier levels. You don't need the platinum level. You just need to get someone into a lounge when they're on your medal or get someone into the best seat choice that they can. There are some very basics around status that you've just got to meet that are, I guess, like hygiene factors to play in. And then beyond that, you don't need to offer huge amounts of benefits. It's around, as we talked about earlier, reducing the friction points in their travel experience. If the rest of your product and experience is really great, they will continue to choose you. Tommy probably has that at Frontier a lot, where people choose to fly them on routes because they offer the great benefits and experience. They don't necessarily need to have, massive status where they can get into lounges all over the world. They just need to have great, easy experiences on the routes that they choose to fly with your airline on.
We'll come back to how many status levels you need to have, but I take your point, Stuart, and I think that certainly people outside the United States that look at the US legacy carriers, and look at how many status levels they have are just bewildered. I mean, let's be frank, anybody outside the United States that looks at the legacy carriers and just tries to get their head around how do you even qualify?
Too many customers to choose from.
Well, that's an interesting point. I want to come back to that, but Stu, when you were here in the Virgin America Loyalty program, I mean, you were playing in this space, and I know, Virgin America wasn't, as big as one of the legacies, but if you're on the West Coast, Virgin America was actually quite a sizable player on the West Coast. I mean, between Los Angeles and San Francisco, I mean, I think, you certainly punched above your weight, if I recall correctly.
I think we actually outscored United there one year on San Fran, LA traffic. So, definitely. But you got to use status as to your unique situation. Mm-hmm. So come back to that.
Tommy, any comments on that discussion?
No, I mean, I agree with what Stuart's saying here. I mean, it depends on who you're going after and who your customers are and knowing them. and utilizing the tools you have. The only thing I will add is you also just need to make sure you're fulfilling your promise on the status, that they are getting their benefits and they're accurately accruing and they're, getting their way to it the next year. And that, if you say you get a free bag, you're getting your free bag. You don't want to add any friction, on the technology side.
No, I think that's fair. And I mean, we'll certainly talk about some of the big programs in a few minutes, but I think that we made a joke, a little lighthearted comment a few minutes ago about having too many tiers. I mean, you've got to have meaningful. Whether you have one tier or you have 10 tiers, you've got to make sure you have meaningful benefits at each level, don't you? I mean, there's no point having a base, a silver, a gold, a platinum, a 1K or executive platinum or whatever it is. If you don't actually have meaningful incremental benefits that you can give to passengers at each level, right?
Not just have meaningful benefits to give, but have meaningful benefits that your customer understands, that they are differentiated. I look at a lot of tier programs out there, status programs, and there is no real differentiation from one tier to the next. There might be, I get a free drink at that next level or something like that. It's inconsequential. And, you're better off having less tier levels and offering probably an unbundled product where people then buy up those extra benefits, or offer some sort of subscription model where someone buys into some sort of a status equivalent program, that they gain access to that, extra benefit through. Got to remember status was originally introduced around separating people to friction points in the travel process.
And, tying back to that point, Stuart, and I mean, we sort of touched on earlier that obviously status can be useful for your super high value managed corporate customers if you are a legacy airline. But depending, we've already covered kind of, that may not be your strategy depending on what market you play in, what your competitive environment's like, and, what you can actually offer. And to Tommy's point, what you can deliver on consistently. What do we think about, what's our view on a status program, whether you've got 1 level, 2 levels, 10 levels, that it's not just about the, each market segment has a reason for being there. But what about the status program acting as a ladder? Today's silver member is tomorrow's platinum, or 1K member.
I think it's not just about your current database. People look at status levels about your current database and progressing people through the tiers. I think it's beyond that. It's actually an acquisition tool. How do I use status to unhook high-value customers from other programs, other competitors, other, where they, in the Virgin America case and Frontier, Tommy, you're probably sitting in a similar kind of position to what Virgin America did. We use status to unhook people from United, Southwest, Delta, American, and give them
JetBlue
an opportunity. JetBlue, give them an opportunity to experience our brand, product, customer service, and let them choose if they want to fly us or not. And it kind of it allows people to shift airlines, and which is really interesting given all the airlines have pretty much and hotels have extended status out to the end of next year. I think it's actually a free-for-all in the next probably 12 to 18 months on status matching and trying to cherry-pick customers to come across, because customers have got no reason to fly with their existing airline because they've already got status retained. There is no incentive for the customer to chase that status. They can say for the next 18 months, I'm platinum at blah, blah, blah. What they can do is now go and use that platinum or gold membership to status match everywhere else and try and experience other products and other services.
And that really comes back to what we were talking about, the switching costs earlier. And I'll come back to kind of the current COVID situation shortly. But, when we talk about switching costs, it's all about, look, you know what? You're getting lounge access. You're getting the priority boarding. You're getting all your friction points removed, Stuart. If you think about switching to my competitor airline, you're going to be starting at the bottom. You're going to be lining up at that back of that check-in line. If something goes wrong, you're not going to have a priority phone number. And whilst status matches have always, while they might have been clunky in the past, they've always sort of existed. The reality is there's always been this disincentive to, well, my business colleagues always tell me how good, or my friends or relatives tell me how good this other airline is, and they enjoy flying it, or it has a better schedule or better price, whatever it might be, better marketing. But they're always afraid to try it because they need to stay on the treadmill to maintain their current status. And I mean, as you fellas know, I mean, my area of passion is the psychology around all this, and we know that people do stay on the status treadmill unless they have a negative experience. To Tommy's point, we do know that if your benefits at a higher level are meaningful and aspirational, people will stretch, and display some stretch behavior. So that although there are, Stuart, I'm going to ask you about some of the data that you've worked with in the past, because there's limits to that behavior as well. It's not just as simple as put a fancy aspirational goal there and everybody will stay on the treadmill forever. But the situation we find ourselves in as we think forward is that it's not just that they can try somebody else at no risk now because they've already got their status locked in. It's actually really about the fact that I think more important than that, Stuart, is there's this massive reset right now. I mean, people who used to travel every week are thinking to themselves, do I actually need to travel? When travel comes back, do I even need to travel as often as I did before? So I'm reconsidering, do I even travel? And let's just pretend we're past all this business right now and nobody's fearful. Do I even need to travel? Am I sick of getting stuck in delays and snowstorms and missed connections and, missing family events? What about the travel budget, whether it's my corporate travel budget because I'm the boss, whether it's my boss's budget and he doesn't want to spend it, or whether it's my personal budget because I'm self-funded? All of these things are flying into the mix where people are reconsidering their need to travel, their frequency of travel. And if I am going to travel, you know what? I've never thought about flying a low-cost carrier before, whether, Frontier or Spirit or EasyJet or Ryanair, any non-traditional legacy carrier that may have been their home base up until this point. All of a sudden, everything's on the table now, isn't it? Because I think Airlines or Dallas or Chicago, if I can get a direct flight on Frontier or Spirit, for example, at half the cost, and I'll get home sooner.
I think airlines are going through a massive squeeze on margins over the next couple of years. Load factors, so capacity is going to be out there. There's still plenty of planes around. Load factors are going to be down. People are going to be less prevalent to fly, and if they do fly, prices are going to be suppressed, and so therefore all the flashy benefits around additional service points or additional lounges, they put a lot of cost into the airline travel budget, travel process. And so, if you have got that unbundled or if you've got that built in, you're going to wear that cost one way or the other. And so you've got to think about how that plays in status. And the reset's got to happen because people won't spend as much to get their status, or they won't be traveling as much to get their status. And so traditional programs are going to have to drop their requirements on either revenue spend or on number of sectors flown, because they're not going to have the same number of members, re-achieving or re-qualifying for their status levels. And so they're either going to have to look at one or two things: reducing those levels to let people through, so reducing the barriers, or allowing people to pay to recover, to retain, or whatever that is from, almost like a subscription model. So,
Tommy, putting all this together, the reset, the challenges to a legacy program. I mean, Stuart, you and I, work with legacy program managers all the time. They're incredibly complex challenges that they have at the best of times. And we can multiply that by a factor of 10 in the current environment. Tommy, does this put you in pole position?
I think it does. We've always been targeting those spillover markets where the legacies, due to the consolidation, went and spread their networks out, or focus more on their bigger hubs, and we've taken advantage of some of those areas. But a lot of those benefits that they currently have don't really have the appeal anymore. How many people really want to be sitting in a lounge with 100 other people having a drink and everyone's touching everything? So is that even a benefit at this point? Is that going to be a benefit again in a year, 2 years after vaccine? Maybe. But right now, it's not. So giving people actual tangible cost savings is a benefit right now. And that's what our, elite program does offer to them. And we're going to see depressed pricing. We're going to see a fight for customers. We've already been seeing some of the lowest fares in the US over the past 2-3 years, a little bit longer than that. And I think it will get even worse when it comes to the actual pricing.
And I really like the structure, Tommy, around people spending on their credit cards goes towards their status. I think people will still continue to spend on their credit cards for everyday spend. And if you can add that in, that's the way that a co-brand program will continue to drive points and therefore currency value, cash into the airline scene. Outside of that, status is going to be an acquisition tool and then a retention tool over the next 2-3 years for an airline only. It's not going to be a gamification of trying to stretch people's wallets to spend up. It's not going to work.
Yeah, we were really happy when we got that benefit with our card and our co-brand. And now we're working with Barclays to do everything we can to add additional earning opportunities in the current environment, utilizing the card that we already built. So it's been interesting, but the fun continues.
Stuart, it's an interesting point because the behavior aspect is so multifaceted, and in normal times even, as you say, it's sort of the balance tips right now. In the short to medium term, but even in normal times, it's multifaceted because you have some members that are motivated by staying on the treadmill. So it's all about retention. It's a switching cost and retention play. You want them to keep going. You want them to be incentivized. You want them to be de-incentivized from looking elsewhere and incentivized to keep going. It's as simple as that. You have members that are motivated by the aspiration, in the sense of, I'm a silver member. I never thought I was going to be a silver member, but I got here and, look at that lofty height of platinum up there. And I get access to the first class lounge if I get there. And, and all of a sudden, they might have that epiphany one day that it actually might be within reach, realistically achievable. And their behavior does change. They shift share of wallet or they do stretch somehow, and you have all these other behaviors that go around with it as well. But when we think about the structure of a status program, and again, I'm kind of thinking about legacies here. I take the point about co-brand contribution to earning, and I think that's a good one. But I'm thinking about legacy structures around the world right now. And we've seen, anybody who's ever heard me over the last number of years knows that the very first thing I say when I say about US airlines is stop copying US airlines. They're either not getting it right, or it's not necessarily the best model, or you have to understand the US market is very, very unique, and what works in the US market isn't necessarily going to work elsewhere. You need to design something for your particular market, But we have seen this push to having this minimum qualifying spend with hugely complicated rules. It doesn't include taxes or this or that. So you want status, you have to spend $15,000 or $18,000, but actually you have to spend more than that because it doesn't include this. It's ridiculous. And that might be okay if literally it was just a case of, look, spend $15,000 and you have top status. Keep it simple as that. If I want top status at Sephora, my wife needs to go and spend $1,000 on, or whatever it is, on, products every year. It's amazing how quickly that happens. That said, if you're going to you have this spending requirement, then you still have to take some flights, and then you have to do this. Other programs like British Airways have tier points, Qantas status credits, Virgin Australia status credits, where it's a function of the fare class that you buy and the distance you travel, which in those markets, typically the longer distance, the more expensive the fare.
It's a separate currency.
It's a separate currency, exactly right.
It's a non-cash currency.
Yes, but the point is it still works the same way. It rewards people who spend more. You need to fly. If you're buying the cheapest fares, you basically have to fly every week if you want to get top status. Or you can fly less frequently if you're buying the most expensive fares. Whether you're qualifying on a status credit type system or whether you're qualifying with a minimum spend, we talked about this with Alan Elias a few weeks ago. It almost doesn't matter. I mean, you could make the criteria really whatever you want, whatever works for your commercials. But in a deflationary fare environment, I put this question to Alan. I'll put this question to you gentlemen as well. In a deflationary fare environment that we're coming into right now, we're really already there. That means somebody on a status credit type earning system, if they're flying the same amount, they're still doing the same number of business trips all the time, in the year, their status doesn't change. They're going to continue to earn or retain the same level of status. But in a minimum spend level system, all of a sudden now they're not achieving the status level they're at. Now they're only achieving this level, but their behavior hasn't changed. They're still giving 100% share of wallet to the same airline. They're still commuting every week or every 2 weeks or every month, whatever their schedule is. They haven't flown less, but they're essentially being penalized because of the design of the program. Now, I frame that in a particular way. I'm blaming the program. I'm saying it's not you shouldn't blame the passenger and make it their fault. They shouldn't be penalized for the fact that the airline sets the fare. The passenger doesn't set the fare. Am I off the mark? Am I on the mark? Can I probe you guys for your thoughts on that?
They're welcome to come over to the dark side. Come on over. So when we were looking at everything we did in 2018, that was a big component of it. Is we saw we had this slide for Joe. Joe was self-funded business traveler, flew 5 times a year, accumulated 24,000 miles that way, and then all the devaluations happened. Fares went down into the toilet. Now he doesn't even qualify for that base elite status on that airline anymore, whereas with us, he still does. He still earns enough for an award flight, and he saves a ton of money because once he gets there, he has the free carry-on, the free seat, and has a better experience. So come on over. We're ready for you.
And as long as he doesn't mess up or have a bad experience, now he's going to be loyal to you, and that's the default position. And now he's your customer to lose. And you don't have to fight for him. Stu?
Well, I think domestic markets versus international markets have different perspectives on this. Most domestic carriers are delusional if they think someone only has status or a loyalty membership only with their airline. Mm-hmm. People have multiple cards in their pocket. And so you've got to play status as to how it best fits your market. Status credit limits were introduced largely to devalue or protect from the low-level corporate manager, who travels regularly, but they buy the cheapest fare of the day and sit down the back of the plane from getting to top-tier platinum status. And so status programs around status credits and things like that were actually around preventing people getting too high up the chain. So I think...
without spending accordingly.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it worked for that situation. I think with the coming recovery out of COVID and the lower fares, lower volume of traffic that's going to be on, lower sectors done on a per-person basis, per-pax basis, I think, as I said before, programs are going to have to reset some of their expectations around tier levels because you're right, people aren't going to achieve the same levels. And I say to a lot of people, status doesn't actually cost you anything until someone flies with your airline. If you're issuing plastic cards still and sending out, bag tokens and stuff like that, it does cost you a little bit, $15-20 maybe, but realistically, it costs you nothing. And so it's just a separate way to recognize people to gamify, to play to the ego around the travel experience. But it can be used at the moment rather than it's been used as a loyal retention tool where people have a badge to say how high they are. I think it will be used as a trading tool now around acquisition and retention. Acquisition in the short term, how do I cherry pick opportunities? Tommy, go for gold, get as many people as you can to come across from United and Delta and Southwest and the rest to have a go at your product and love the Frontier experience and go hard in the next 12 months. And then off the back of that, in about 18 months' time, it's about how do you flip that status into a retention process to hold them loyal to you and keep them coming back. So it's going to be an interesting one for the legacy carriers. International carriers is a different space. They tend to be single carrier, single market. The Royal Airlines of XYZ country. Realistically, their main customer is just in country. If you're a member of a global alliance, alliances control the level of status that people have and how many status members you have in each tier. But I think those are being relaxed at the moment. So I'd be going for gold and trying to do as many status matches as I could. Qatar made an interesting play at the Virgin Australia group here. And largely those people, I am one. I'm a platinum in Velocity. I status matched to platinum in Qatar. Now I can walk into a Qantas lounge and I can accrue miles into my Qatar program. So Qatar get the cash rather than Qantas. So a little bit of a financial play as well as a market play by those guys.
I think there's a little, market political play in there as well. Given Qantas and Qatar there as well, but it's a great practical example of another dimension of how status strategies can work. And obviously Qatar is playing a bigger game than simply trying to attract some members to buy some Qatar tickets. It's clearly more complicated than that, and as you say, it affects other currency flows. I just wanted to pause for a quick second, do the obligatory thanks to our sponsors. I need to thank our Loyalty Summit sponsors, Engage, Amia, Adara. Thank you very much for your support. Hilton Honors, who is our official hotel venue partner for Loyalty Summit in the Americas. Radisson Rewards, who is our official hotel partner for Loyalty Summit in Europe. And we have some great news in terms of our next plans for our next in-person Loyalty Summit event. Hopefully, you gentlemen will be able to join us. But we have. Let me just see if I can get it up on the screen here. We have announced our next Loyalty Summit will be in Washington DC, and we have some fantastic speakers lined up. It's going to be in December. And obviously a very obvious question, what if things aren't sorted out by then? Look, clearly the event is, we're planning on it going ahead. We're hoping by December that everything is opened up again. If that isn't the case, obviously we'll let everybody know. But we have some exciting speakers already set to join us. You can see some of them on the screen there. You can find more information at loyaltysummit.com. So please definitely head on over and check that out. It's going to be at the Conrad, Washington, D.C., which is a phenomenal venue. If you haven't been to that property, I'd encourage everybody to check out that property when they get a chance. Hopefully when you join us for the Loyalty Summit, but even in another time, it really is a fabulous property. So I'd want to draw everybody's attention to that and thank Hilton for their support with that as well. And we mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, but just to make sure everybody who's listening is clear, if you are in the travel industry, the airline, hotel, and car rental industry, we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to attend, even in the tough, challenging environment we have right now. So if you book your ticket through August 15 under our Back to Business sale, your ticket is free. Our sponsors are graciously picking up the cost for you to attend if you're an industry representative. So check us out, details on loyaltysummit.com. And if you're not an industry representative, make sure you get in on the early bird pricing. Save yourself some money there. We don't want people paying more money than they need to. Back to the questions. In terms of numbers in a member program, I mean, we talked about how you set your status tiers, and you could set it with a credit or a tier point type system, which still rewards higher spending members over lower spending members. So to Stuart's example, that person who just buys the cheap fares down the back, you're not going to make top tier status under that system. Or you can achieve the same thing by having a minimum spend threshold. It's a little bit more of a brute attempt at doing so. And there's definitely some psychological differences there, whether you have a more overt, hey, Tommy, you just spent $15,000 versus, hey, Tommy, you need to accrue 1,500 status points. Because if you know you're spending $15,000 and your boss knows you're spending $15,000 or your spouse knows you're spending $15,000, it has a very different effect to, oh, I earned 1,500 status points. But, the US market is interesting. And I know you're both very familiar with it, obviously. It's a very road warrior domestic travel market. There are a lot of people who travel regularly. There are a lot of people who achieve status regardless of where you set the tiers. And top tier benefits do come at a cost. It's not just bag tags. Obviously, Stuart, you mentioned, when somebody, enrolls as a status member, but there are real costs when a status member is utilizing those benefits. How much of a consideration is it in terms of limiting the membership at each tier? Well, you're into your elite program overall, but also at each tier. Is there a limit to how many top tier members you want to have? Or is it a case of set the criteria, and if everybody reaches it, great, you'll welcome everybody in? Tommy, thoughts on that one?
So we look at it a little bit more as the latter of what you just said. We say, as long as we look at our elite customers as a mutually beneficial agreement with them, we're giving you something because you're giving us something. You're coming to us first. You're flying on me a lot. You're spending on my co-brand. You're doing all the actions that I want you to take and that are positive for the airline, but also positive for you because you accrue miles. You get your status. You get your ancillaries for free. So we look at it that way. We don't really set a set amount of, hey, we can't go over X number of elite 100Ks, elite 50Ks, elite 20Ks. We welcome all people to try to achieve those. And when they get there, get online, book your next flight, and take advantage of those benefits.
Stu?
I think two things. I think we're a little bit delusional about how often people really fly. It's only a very small percentage that do fly regularly and do chase those tier levels. I've seen a lot of programs globally. I've done a lot of benchmarking on percentage of membership. I kind of know roughly where those sit, and I can kind of assess someone's tier based on that, on their mix of platinum, gold, silver sort of membership pretty quickly. I think the crossover to credit card programs is interesting, where I see programs similar to Tommy's where credit cards play into the same tier points, credit card spend. You tend to see larger tier bases as a percentage of the total membership, which is interesting. But you also see the credit card programs are a lot more successful at the same time. So, I come back to, I think status is a tool. You've got to use status as a tool in your loyalty toolkit to achieve what your goals are. And so the big programs in the US, if you talk about them, they have to limit status by each tier. Hence, every time they try to stretch people up and up, they have to introduce new tiers and slightly change the way the benefits are structured and the qualifying criteria. And it becomes complex and less meaningful to most people in their database. We had an interesting situation in Virgin Australia where it was about 7% of our database had never flown with the airline, but had earned points and were shopping online and redeeming those points for gift vouchers and online purchases, toasters, kettles, whatever, fashion items. In the big programs in the US, I'm sure there's a fair percentage of people that are doing exactly the same thing. It might be the husband's a road warrior and the wife is simply using those points to shop online and get herself some vouchers to continue shopping online elsewhere as well. But so I think the percentage of people that are actually taking advantage of status and flying day in, day out is a lot smaller. Yeah, there are peaks and troughs, and so that Monday morning flight and that Friday afternoon flight, you might have 40-50% of your guests lined up that are status members trying to get onto the plane, but that Tuesday 10 a.m. flight has got one. So you've got to just manage your capacity relative to your benefits.
And Stuart, you kind of hinted at it earlier, but I mean, some of the airlines as well, do have some hard caps or restrictions that they have to abide by in terms of alliance rules as well, in terms of total elite membership, but also, numbers at elite at each tier. So if too many were achieving that criteria, whilst on one hand you might want to celebrate that success, and that means, the elite program's doing a great job of motivating airline spend by customers. But if a particular, say the top tier gets too bloated, then they could be in contravention of alliance rules. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. It's interesting. Did some work with Royal Air Morocco before they joined Oneworld recently. And, realistically, Oneworld were just saying whatever your tier numbers are when you join the program is the mix that you've got to maintain. So we were trying to encourage them to go out with a massive status match and totally inflate their numbers up. And I think that's the issue, is that the alliance programs don't really know where their tier numbers are at, but they kind of want to control each airline and not cherry pick off each other. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really what they're trying to do there, and then map their statuses so there's consistency and benefits being offered across people moving when they do travel on the alliance network, on the partner network. So I prefer status when you're in a smaller regional airline like Tommy has with Frontier, that you can be a little bit more innovative and a little bit more flexible and use status to acquire people, retain people, to incentivize use of your credit card, to use status in a number of different ways. And it's really just another currency and another way of encouraging people to fly with you or enroll and engage with your loyalty program.
We talked a little bit about the co-brand card. I want to flip that question slightly, Stuart, and to Tommy. If we think about our current membership, when we think about, there's the cat's out of the bag nowadays. Co-brand relationships can be very profitable for an airline, particularly in the US space. You've got a bunch of people that fly your airline already. You've got a bunch of people in your membership database. You've got a bunch of people that are already elite members, and you're looking at all those people and going, hey, this is a ripe database to market the co-brand card to get these people to go ahead and take up the co-brand card. Do you see, or, have you seen, Stuart, I know you've done a lot of work with the data on this in the past. Do you see a difference or a standout, in terms of some types of members have a higher propensity or a lower propensity to actually take up the co-brand card? Stuart, I'll start with you and then go to Tommy, because I'm interested if there's a difference in view on here.
Yeah, I think your status members, largely, you should get about a 50% penetration of them having the co-brand card. The other 50% have a co-brand with another airline or with American Express.
And do you feel that is there a certain, if I'm thinking about top tier members versus mid tier versus low tier, in the data that you've worked with in the past, have you seen any meaningful differentiation there?
You'll see a lot greater take up and penetration through your silver and gold members. Your platinum members will have an Amex in their pocket, and they probably have a co-brand often at another airline that they've flown with in the past. It's a little harder to get them to change credit cards. They're pretty busy people. They fly a lot, obviously. But you should be able to get about half of them to convert. You get a better penetration in your silver and gold members. They tend to be ones that take it up quicker. Mm-hmm. Your gold members, sometimes they're playing two cards. They've got gold at two airlines, and so it depends on where their preference of co-brand is.
Got it. Tommy, do you see any differentiation there across the base or the type of member?
So we do see it differently, and I think a lot of that comes down to the guy with the Amex in his pocket getting platinum. His company's paying for that. Mm-hmm. So we see a very high penetration rate on our top tier. It continues about that same penetration rate in our mid tier, and then our lower tier is still above the benchmark that Stuart just put out there for those members. And, they're our best customers, not to mention they can earn elite status so easily with it. So we give quite a bit, but, we got a good program with it.
And I mean, just coming back to the right structure and the right mix, and I mean, I think that just, that presents a pretty compelling story between those two comments in terms of both you can leverage your program to increase your penetration for your co-brand product because your co-brand product is profitable. But you can leverage the co-brand product to increase the penetration in your airline to make both, the sum of the parts, greater, the whole greater than the sum of the parts in that kind of situation. Stuart, when you were at Virgin America, I mean, you had an interesting structure. If I think back correctly, and forgive me if I recall wrong, it seems so many years ago now. We miss Virgin America over here. But if I remember correctly, I mean, you essentially had, in effect, a minimum spend to earn status. But then you had some anomalies, if I recall correctly, and then you needed to introduce an alternative method of earning status. Do I recall correctly on that?
Yeah, to an extent. Status was flight sector driven mostly, and and that kind of, we didn't have a lot of routes, so therefore it drove kind of like a minimum spend equivalent. It wasn't directly a minimum spend, but that was, and the weakness in that was someone flying up and down, San Francisco, LA, could never achieve or had to do a lot of flights to achieve our top tier, which was gold. If we were going to introduce platinum, we had to do something completely different. And it wasn't quite a minimum spend, but it was something fairly closely aligned, largely revenue based. So, but it was sector driven at the same time to an extent.
But because of that kind of anomaly, like you said, you might have people flying, maybe commuting LA, San Francisco every week, but, because of the structure of the program, but that type of route traffic, it was going to be very challenging for them to achieve the program. I mean, is this a good example of where, you sometimes need alternative methods of qualification?
Oh, yeah. And look, what I did is, we pulled out of the data that we could analyze there who the people were. And, we're talking only, less than 50 people. And so I just went to them and upgraded them to gold. So, you can always circumvent the way the programs work from a status point of view. And realistically, I was using that as a way to retain them rather than let them go across to United, our competitor on that route, and take up 1K over there. So, in the same way, any airline at the moment can use status to acquire new customers. On
that point, as we finish up in our last couple of minutes, Tommy, where do you see airline elite status in 2022? We're in a very unique kind of dynamic right now. We've kind of hinted that it's a bit of a free-for-all coming up. But realistically, putting not so much a crystal ball on, but just, you are a program manager, how are you thinking through, strategy, looking at, well, it's not just year to year right now. We've got to think forward a couple of years.
So I think we're going to see a little bit of a shift and possibly a backtrack from some of our bigger competitors on some of the changes they made to kind of recapture. I know on our side, we're looking at it as a opportunity, and we are going to throw promotions out there, possibly reduce earnings, but most likely not. We're really trying to avoid that to get people up to elite in 2022. I think the most interesting thing will be who throws new benefits out there. What are those benefits? And is it COVID related? And is it from the fallout of all the COVID stuff? Or is it just something that they've been thinking about for a while? I think the entire industry has a chance to innovate now, including us, and maybe switch some things up. So take the opportunity while you can.
Stuart?
I think Tommy's going to do a status match program with me over the next 12 months. We're going to have 100 million members in the Frontier database, and he's going to be flogging credit cards to all of them. And look out, here comes Frontier. And the loyalty program will be driving the financials well and truly. I think it's an interesting one as to where the programs end up. I think the legacy carriers only have things to lose. The smaller regional carriers have great gains to make. And anyone that's got good product, good brand, good service will win out in the end. Because at the end of the day, low fares, there's not going to be a huge amount of differentiation in fares. There's going to be a price war. High supply, low demand creates a price war. When people shop on price and there's not a huge amount of differentiation on price, it will be interesting as to how status plays into the game beyond price. Does it make a difference or not?
I think it's a good point. I think when times are good, if you're a big legacy program, you can take your elite base for granted in a lot of ways. And a lot of cases, they're not going to move because, particularly in a market like the US, they might be hub captive, or in other markets around the world, they might be route captive because you're the only airline that flies to that destination. There's additional barriers to exit rather than just the status benefits that member's earning. But in the environment we're going in forward, I think that's a good call out, Stuart, is that if you're a big legacy carrier and you've been perhaps taking your members for granted, they're yours to lose right now. You don't have much upside, but you've got a lot of downside. If you are a more nimble carrier, or you're a legacy that is being more innovative, then that seems to me to be, if you want a path to upside, you have to be nimble and innovative right now. And the advantage to that is obviously for the smaller carriers. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Any final comments, gentlemen? Sign up to Frontier if you haven't already.
Yeah, join the Frontier program if you haven't already. There you go, Tommy. I'll do a plug for you.
Of course.
Take out the credit card. That's something I think that, overall this COVID experience, I haven't seen a lot of innovation happen in the loyalty industry globally. People have dropped their heads. They have started to come out in the last month or so with stuff around shopping online, and they've started to realize the e-commerce boom that's occurred. I think that change in behavior is going to be a little bit longer term. And as programs wake up to that, they're going to see that they're going to need to utilize their databases or leverage their databases in different ways. And, I'd love to see a status program for people that don't fly, that shop online a lot. So why doesn't a program have platinum status for the person who spends the most on their credit card away from the airline? How do you recognize them better? Give them some benefits or give them a badge of honor. What is it really?
We already do that. So, but yeah. I agree with you. It's going to be interesting to see what people do. I think we're in a unique position that we just went through this entire revamp. It wasn't, wiping the slate completely clean. We still retained some of our old stuff, but we knew we had something stale. So that's why we went down the path we did. And it looks like, as of right now, the path we went down may benefit us greatly as we go through this COVID.
Thank you both for joining us, Tommy Langhauser and Stuart Dinnis. Stuart, I appreciate it's very late in Australia, so we'll let you get off to bed. But thank you very much for giving generously of your time, both of you. Fascinating discussion. I'd encourage everybody, head on over to loyaltysummit.com. You can check out the details of our Washington, D.C. event for December. You can also check out the replay of this. We'll have that posted up on our YouTube channel as well in the next day or two. And if you missed any of our other episodes, you can do so as well. Stay tuned. We'll be announcing details of our next show next week and the guests for that as well. Again, thank you both for joining. Very much appreciated, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Tommy.
Bye now.
Okay.